It's time now for your business update with Stephen Carroll. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Jeannie.
The first phase of the US-China trade agreement is set to be signed today.
That's right. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He is in Washington. He'll sign this 86-page document with President Trump in a few hours' time. It's a limited agreement which only tackles some of the underlying issues in the now 18-month-old trade war. It will include a commitment from China to vastly increase its purchases of US goods, and in return, Washington will cut the tariffs on some Chinese imports, but not remove them entirely. Many more of the complex issues are still to be addressed, as Solange Moujane reports.
After 18 months of heightened tension, the US-China trade war is entering a new, quieter chapter of reconciliation. In phase one of the new trade deal, many promises have been made. China has pledged to buy $200 billion of US goods. And even if the bulk of tariffs remain in place, the US has vowed to cut them for around $120 billion worth of Chinese imports. Beijing has also promised to stop the forced transfer of American technology to Chinese firms. But this phase of the deal stops short of tackling the bigger picture of China's intellectual property practices.
We're very focused on implementing phase one. We'll start phase two, but we're very focused. This is an enormous achievement for the president and the economic team. This is the first time we'll have a fully binding agreement with China with structural changes, technology protection, and an additional $200 billion of purchases.
According to reports, China said they'll buy $80 billion worth of American manufactured goods over the next 2 years, as well as $35 billion in services, $40 billion in agriculture, and $50 billion in energy purchases. But such promises are much higher than pre-trade war figures, raising questions about how realistic phase one really is. With no set date for phase two, the 86-page document falls short of being a lasting peace agreement, but paves the way for a thawing of trade relations.
And earlier we spoke to our correspondent in Beijing, Charles Pellegrin, about how this agreement leaves many of the more difficult issues unresolved.
Those phase two issues are definitely much trickier, much more difficult to resolve, mostly because they get at something that is the industrial subsidies program, which represents basically China's economic model, which gives a huge role to the state in the economy. It is a communist economy after all, and so this will be much more complicated, and this is not likely to change, especially as those industrial subsidy programs are used to fuel China's development, especially China's technological development. Chinese technological development is worrying the Washington side because they want to make sure that they continue to be the world leader in that particular area. So really it gets to some sort of strategic rivalry between two great powers here. And this also explains the American campaign against Huawei, at least according to Beijing. The Beijing side, this explains why the United States is lobbying governments around the world not to give contracts to Huawei to set up 5G networks, or the sanctions against Huawei. Huawei represents this Chinese economic model that the United States wants to change.
A lot of the drama around this story is played out on the financial markets, taking a tumble at every escalation. Today in Europe, markets not seeing much reaction. They've known about this deal for a while, so there's not very much to move on the basis of. We've got gains in London, very small gains, but Paris and Frankfurt in the red. Investors also digesting news that Germany's economic growth slowed to its lowest level in 6 years in 2019.
Next, now, the British government's agreed to a rescue deal for the struggling regional airline Flybe.
And it's making waves in the airline industry as well. The boss of British Airways' parent company has lashed out at the deal, calling it a misuse of public funds. Flybe was rescued on Tuesday after its shareholders agreed to invest more money. The UK government has also gotten involved. It's reported to be delaying a tax bill to help the carrier. Flybe is the main airline using smaller UK airports, including Belfast City, Newquay and Southampton. BA boss Willie Walsh has written to the British Transport Minister to outline his concerns.
And there's more bad news for Boeing as the 737 MAX crisis continues to take its toll.
So orders for Boeing planes slumped to their lowest level in 16 years last year. After cancellations, it booked orders for just 54 planes in 2019, but even that number is unlikely to be delivered because of the collapse of India's Jet Airways that had a big order in with Boeing. Their deliveries fell as well, while they rose at Boeing's European rival Airbus. That's good news for Airbus suppliers, but they're being careful of not putting all of their hopes in one company.
One airplane maker's loss is often another's gain. And for rivals Boeing and Airbus, 2019 was just that. With the fallout following the 737 MAX scandal, U.S. airplane maker Boeing announced its lowest number of orders in over a decade. Deliveries plunged too by over 50%, leaving Boeing trailing its European rival Airbus, which reported an 8% yearly jump. That's great news for the company's 50,000 employees across France, but also Airbus's subcontractors. 10,000 companies with nearly 160,000 employees work alongside Airbus, including this steel parts maker.
I was hired in 2005 when we were fewer than 50 employees. Now we're over 140, so our growth has largely been thanks to Airbus orders. So yes, we're growing with Airbus.
Some subcontractors, though, are wary of becoming too dependent on a single client, especially after watching the crisis at Boeing.
Safran, the French engine maker, has managed to sell its components to Airbus, Boeing and Comac, the Chinese maker. So there is a push to remain competitive, but also to not be entirely dependent on Airbus.
But for now, business is doing great. Airbus currently has so many orders they have a 10-year production backlog, or over 7,000 planes waiting to be made.
Not too long ago, we saw Elon Musk dancing, and now it turns out he could be dancing for joy with a massive bonus if Tesla's shares continue to rise.
So the electric car maker is now worth more than Ford and General Motors combined. It's been rising in value due to increased deliveries, but also this expectation within the industry that demand for electric cars will keep going up. So on Tuesday, Tesla was valued at just under $97 billion. Under Musk's share bonus deal, if that figure rises to $100 billion and stays there for 6 months, he gets stock worth almost $350 million as a bit of a thank you.
That's crazy. Crazy money.
Big numbers, yeah.
Stephen, thanks for that. Stephen Carroll there talking about the business on France 24.